Finch's classroom, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like forgotten words. The room smelled of old books, lemon polish, and a faint, clean trace of sandalwood, his scent. It was a scent of order, of quiet contemplation, of things precisely where they should be. Alistair stood before his seminar on classical literature, a man seemingly carved from the same marble as the statues he discussed. At 28, he was the youngest professor at the prestigious Evergreen Academy, and his presence was a subject of constant, hushed admiration. His jaw was a clean, severe line, often set in concentration. His hair, the color of dark walnut, was always perfectly styled. His clothes today, a charcoal grey waistcoat over a white shirt, sleeves rolled precisely to the elbows, were impeccable. But it was his eyes that truly captivated. The color of a storm-tossed sea, they held a depth and an intensity that could silence a room with a single glance. He spoke about the Odyssey, about Odysseus's long journey home, his voice a low, resonant baritone that filled the space. Thiwe. Central tension, he said, pacing slowly before the oak lectern, is between Nostos, the longing for home, and Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality. Odysseus's discipline, his unwavering focus on Ithaca, is constantly tested by the allure of the new, the strange, the undisciplined. His gaze swept over the 12 students in the intimate seminar. They were the best and brightest, hanging on his every word, all except one. Leo Moreau was a study in beautiful carelessness. He sat slouched in his chair by the window, one long leg stretched into the aisle. His head was propped on his hand, but he wasn't asleep. His eyes, a warm, startling hazel, were fixed not on Alistair, but on the world outside, where a late September breeze tousled the crimson and gold leaves of the old oaks. A lock of his chestnut hair fell across his forehead. He had the look of a Renaissance poet, all soulful eyes and full lips, with a smudge of what might have been charcoal on the cuff of his slightly rumpled white shirt. Alistair had noticed him from the first day. How could he not? Leo was a splash of vibrant, wet paint on Alistair's meticulously composed canvas. He was brilliant. His admissions essay on Ovid's Metamorphoses had been the most original piece of writing Alistair had encountered in years. But he was also profoundly, infuriatingly unreliable. Mr. Moreau, Alistair's voice cut through the room, sharper than he intended. Perhaps you can enlighten us. Do you believe Odysseus's curiosity with the Cyclops was a failure of discipline or a necessary part of his heroism? Leo's head slowly turned from the window. He didn't startle or look embarrassed. He met Alistair's gaze with a calm, unnerving directness. A slow, easy smile played on his lips. I think, Professor, he began, his voice a warm, melodic contrast to Alistair's measured tones, that calling it a failure implies there was a correct path. He was curious. He wanted glory. It was a mistake, sure, but it's the mistake that makes the story. Without it, he just sails home, a bit boring, don't you think? His lack of discipline is what makes him human. It's the crack that lets the light in. The class fell silent. The answer was insolent, brilliant, and completely undermined the point Alistair was about to make. A flicker of irritation, hot and sharp, went through him. But beneath it something else stirred, a thrill at the challenge, a fascination with the way Leo's mind worked, untamed and radiant. An interesting interpretation, Alistair said, his voice carefully neutral, reasserting control, but one that conflates narrative interest with moral or strategic righteousness. The point isn't that it makes a better story for us, but that it nearly doomed his entire crew. Discipline, in this context, is about survival. It's the framework that contains the genius and protects the whole. He held Leo's gaze, trying to impart a lesson that felt suddenly intensely personal. Without the framework, the genius burns too bright and consumes itself. Leo's smile didn't falter. He gave a small, conceding nod, but his eyes sparkled with unrepentant mischief. The exchange lasted only a moment, but for Alistair, the classroom seemed to tilt on its axis. The rest of the hour passed in a blur. He dismissed the class with a reminder about their essays on Aristotelian tragedy. As the students filed out, Alistair busied himself with his notes. He heard the rustle of paper and a soft curse. He looked up. Leo was kneeling, gathering pages that had spilled from his battered leather satchel. The contents were a chaos of sketchbooks, loose-leaf poems, dog-eared novels, and a single, bright, red apple. Alistair walked over and knelt beside him, his own movements precise and economical. He began to help gather the papers. His fingers brushed against Leo's as they both reached for a sheet, and a jolt, like a static shock, passed between them. Alistair recoiled as if burned, snatching his hand back. Leo froze, his eyes widening. Slightly, his gaze dropping to Alistair's hand before flicking back to his face. "Sorry," Leo murmured, his voice softer now, the bravado gone. "It's fine," Alistair said, his own voice tighter than usual. He picked up a sketchbook that had fallen open. The page was filled with a stunning, intricate drawing of the Academy's clock tower, but rendered as if it were a living tree, its stone morphing into bark, its clock face a glowing moon, gears and vines intertwined. It was breathtaking. "This is exceptional, Leo," Alistair said, the praise leaving his lips before he could stop it. Leo quickly took the sketchbook, closing it with a faint flush on his cheeks. "Just doodles." "They are not doodles," Alistair stated firmly. He stood up, needing to re-establish the distance between them, both physical and hierarchical. "Your essay on the poetics is due next Friday. I trust it will be on time." Leo slung his satchel over his shoulder, the moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by his usual charming carelessness. "Wouldn't want to disappoint you, Professor." He left, and Alistair was alone in the sudden quiet of the classroom. He could still feel the echo of that touch on his skin, a ghost of a sensation that seemed to burrow deep into his blood. He looked at his hand, then clenched it into a fist. This would not do. This fascination was unprofessional. It was a lack of discipline in himself that he could not, would not tolerate. He resolved then and there. He would break Leo of his habits. He would channel that brilliant, chaotic energy into something structured, something lasting. It was his duty as a teacher. He would focus on the boy's mind, on his potential. He would be the framework. It was the only way to manage this strange, unsettling tempest that Leo Moreau had unleashed within him. The essay on Aristotelian tragedy was, as predicted, late. It appeared on Alistair's desk a full week after the deadline, slid under his office door sometime during the night. There was no note of apology, just Leo's name scrawled in his looping handwriting on the front page. Irritation flared in Alistair's chest, hot and familiar. He sat at his desk, the rich smell of old leather and brewing coffee surrounding him, and began to read, and his irritation melted away, replaced by sheer unadulterated awe. The essay was a masterpiece. Leo had argued that catharsis wasn't just for the audience, but for the tragic hero themselves, a final, brutal moment of clarity and discipline before their fall, where all their chaotic choices crystallized into inevitable fate. It was profound, beautifully written, and wildly original. It was also technically a failure. The grade at the top, circled in Alistair's precise red pen, was a stark C, followed by the words, "See me." Professor Finch. He caught Leo after the next seminar. The other students hurried out, leaving Leo languidly packing his things. "A moment, Mr. Moreau," Alistair said, leaning against his desk. Leo approached, that faint, infuriatingly charming smile on his face. "Professor, did you get my essay?" "I did," Alistair said, holding up the paper. "It is, without exaggeration, one of the most insightful pieces of literary criticism I have ever read from an undergraduate." Leo's smile widened, a flash of triumph in his eyes. "And," Alistair continued, his voice hardening, "it earns a C for being over a week late. Potential without discipline is merely potential. It is a promise unkept." The triumph in Leo's eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of defiance. "The ideas don't change because they're a week late." "Their impact does," Alistair countered. "A symphony played a week after the concert is just noise. Context is everything. Your lack of discipline disrespects your own talent." "It tells me you don't take it seriously. And if you don't, why should anyone else?" The words hit their mark. Leo's shoulders stiffened slightly. The smile vanished. "What would you have me do then? Write it on time and make it boring?" I would have you learn to harness your brilliance, Alistair said, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. He took a step closer. The air between them crackled. I will not stand by and watch you treat your gift so carelessly. Starting now, you will come to my office every Friday at 4 o'clock. You will show me your outlines, your drafts, your progress. You will learn to apply structure to your creativity. Is that understood? It was overstepping. He knew it. The sheer presumption of it was breathtaking. But the drive to fix this, to shape this raw, glorious talent, to be near it, and somehow channel the chaotic energy he felt in Leo's presence into something he could understand, it overrode all professional caution. Leo looked stunned. A flush crept up his neck. For a long moment he said nothing, just searched Alistair's face as if looking for the trick. Every Friday, he finally said, his voice quiet. Every Friday, Alistair confirmed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Consider it an independent study in professional discipline. A strange expression crossed Leo's face, not anger, not resentment, but something like curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of challenge. Okay, he said simply. 4 o'clock. And so it began. The first Friday, Leo arrived exactly on time, a rough outline for his next essay on Kafka in hand. He was uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with the strap of his satchel. Alistair's office was a reflection of its owner, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large, tidy desk, a comfortable armchair for guests, and a smaller, harder-backed, one that Leo was directed to. Alistair sat in his leather desk chair, creating a barrier of polished wood between them. The session was stilted. Alistair was all business, his feedback clipped and precise. Your thesis is strong, but your supporting arguments are nebulous. Structure them thusly. He drew a diagram on a notepad, sliding it across the desk. Leo listened, nodded, his responses short. The vibrant boy from the classroom was subdued here in this sanctum of order. The second Friday he was 5 minutes late, arriving slightly out of breath, his hair wind-blown. Sorry, the light in the art studio was perfect. I lost track of time. The old irritation sparked, but Alistair quashed it. Sit, he said. This time, when discussing Leo's ideas on magical realism, the conversation flowed more easily. Leo's passion ignited as he spoke, his hands moving animatedly. Alistair found himself getting drawn in, not just as a teacher but as a captivated audience. It's not about escape, Leo said, his eyes alight. It's about using the fantastical to reveal a deeper truth about the real world. It's a different kind of discipline, a discipline of metaphor. Alistair leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. An intriguing perspective, but your paper must still ground that concept in textual evidence. The magic must serve the argument, not undermine it. That is your framework. He was building a trellis for a wild climbing rose, and the metaphor did not escape him. By the third Friday, a new routine had settled. Alistair would have 2 cups of coffee ready, one black for himself, one with a splash of cream for Leo, because he'd noticed how he took it once in the library. It was a small thing, a teacher noticing a student's preference. He told himself it was merely conducive to a productive working environment. Leo would arrive, often with a new sketch to show him first, a detail of a gargoyle on the library roof, a study of a friend's hands. It was a peace offering, a key to his world. Then they would work, and they would talk, not just about literature, but about art, music, philosophy. Alistair was meant to be the teacher, but he found himself learning from Leo, seeing the world through his wildly creative lens. He began to crave those Fridays. The entire week seemed to build towards that 1 hour. He found himself watching the clock on Thursday afternoons, a quiet anticipation thrumming under his skin. His own discipline, once an ironclad suit, now felt like a skin he was itching to, shared for those 60 minutes. He was falling, and he knew it. It was in the way his heart beat a little faster when he heard Leo's knock on the door. It was in the way he memorized the cadence of his laughter. It was in the way he had to consciously stop himself from looking at Leo's mouth when he spoke, or from noticing the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he leaned over to point something out on a page. This was dangerous. This was a line that could not be crossed, a boundary that was absolute. His career, his reputation, Leo's future, everything was at stake. His feelings were a wild thing, as unruly as Leo had ever been, and he clamped down on them with every ounce of his will. Discipline. He would master this. He had to. Winter settled over Evergreen Academy, draping the Gothic spires in a blanket of pristine white. The world outside Alistair's window became a monochrome study in stillness, a sharp contrast to the turmoil within him. The Friday sessions were now the anchor of his existence. Leo's work had improved dramatically. His essays were not only brilliant, but punctual. His arguments sharpened by the structure Alistair provided. He was thriving, and a fierce, proud joy bloomed in Alistair's chest whenever he thought about it, a joy he desperately tried to classify as purely professional. One frigid Friday in late January, Leo didn't show up. 4 o'clock came and went. 4:15, 4:30. A cold anxiety far deeper than mere professional concern gripped Alistair. This was unlike him. Their sessions had become sacred. Leo was reckless, but not about this, not anymore. By 5, Alistair was pacing his office, his coffee gone cold. He told himself not to overreact. Perhaps Leo was ill. Perhaps he'd forgotten. The thought stung. He tried to grade papers but found himself staring at the same sentence for 10 minutes. Finally, he pulled on his coat and scarf, deciding to check the art studio, the place Leo most often disappeared to. The academy halls were silent and empty. His footsteps echoed on the marble floors as he made his way to the north wing, where the art department was housed. The studio, Doctor was slightly ajar, and a sliver of warm light fell into the dark corridor. He pushed the door open. The studio was vast and chaotic, smelling of turpentine, clay, and dust. Canvases stood stacked against walls. In the center of the room, under the glow of a single angled lamp, sat Leo. He was perched on a stool, hunched over a large drawing board, his back to the door. He was so engrossed he didn't hear Alistair enter. Alistair stopped a few feet away, his breath catching in his throat. Leo was drawing, his hand moving with a feverish intensity. His shoulders were tense, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing the fine muscles in his forearms. The page was a whirlwind of dark, frantic lines, a stormy sea, a splintered ship, figures grasping at wreckage. It was powerful, raw and full of an anguish that was palpable. "Leo?" Alistair said softly, not wanting to startle him. Leo jumped, his charcoal stick snapping in his hand. He spun around on the stool. His face was pale, his eyes red-rimmed, and wide with surprise. There was a smudge of black charcoal on his cheekbone. He looked young, vulnerable, and utterly lost. "Professor," he exclaimed, quickly wiping his face with the back of his hand, smearing the charcoal further. "God, I'm so sorry. I lost track of time. His voice cracked, and he looked away, towards the chaotic drawing. "What is it?" Alistair asked, his own worry eclipsing any thought of reprimand. He took a step closer. "What's wrong?" Leo was silent for a long moment, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "It's nothing, just family stuff." He let out a shaky breath. "My dad, he thinks my being here is a waste of time, a waste of money. He wants me to come home, study something practical." The words were laced with a pain that was all too familiar to Alistair, the pain of a dream being dismissed. He understood then. The drawing wasn't just a random scene, it was his inner world. The ship was his future breaking apart. Without thinking, Alistair closed the distance between them. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. The contact was electric. He could feel the tension coiled in the boy's muscles, the heat of his skin through the thin cotton of his shirt. It was a breach of protocol, a step over an invisible line, but it felt utterly, devastatingly necessary. "Look at me," Alistair said, his voice low and firm. Leo slowly raised his gaze. The defiance and charm were gone, stripped away, leaving only a raw, open need for validation, for someone to see him and not look away. "This," Alistair said, his grip tightening slightly, his eyes locked on Leo's, "is not a waste. You are not a waste. What you can do," he gestured to the powerful, emotional drawing with his free hand. This This is extraordinary. It is a language few people can speak. Your father's inability to see its value does not diminish it. Do you understand me?" He was too close. He could see the flecks of gold in Leo's hazel eyes, the faint dusting of freckles across his nose, the perfect bow of his upper lip. The air between them was thick, charged with everything unsaid. Alistair's heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, undisciplined rhythm. He wanted to pull him into an embrace, to shield him from every doubt, to promise him the world. He wanted to kiss the charcoal smudge from his cheek. The want was a physical ache, so powerful it terrified him. Leo's eyes searched his face, wide and uncertain. He leaned into the touch on his shoulder, just a fraction. "Alistair," he whispered. The use of his first name here in the silent, intimate studio was like a lightning strike. It shattered the last remnants of Alistair's control. For a heartbeat, a single, terrifying, glorious heartbeat, he thought he might yield. He might cross the line and never look back, but then the reality of it all came crashing down. The age difference, the power dynamic, the scandal, the certain professional ruin, the potential to destroy the very talent he sought to protect. Discipline. It was all he had left. He withdrew his hand as if from a flame, taking a sharp step back. The space between them felt suddenly arctic. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets, his fists clenched. "Your work is too important to neglect because of doubt," he said. His voice strained, forcing it back into the familiar professional register. It sounded hollow to his own ears. "The essay on magical realism. I expect it on my desk Monday morning. Do not be late." He turned and walked out of the studio, his steps quick and sure, a retreat masquerading as a victory. He didn't look back. He couldn't. If he saw the confusion and hurt he knew would be on Leo's face, his framework would shatter completely. He walked through the cold, dark corridors back to his office, the ghost of Leo's shoulder under his hand burning through his skin. He had built the trellis, but the rose was threatening to pull the whole wall down, and he didn't know if he was the gardener or the ruin. The next week was agony. An invisible wall had been erected between them. In seminar, Leo was quiet, withdrawn. He didn't look out the window, but he didn't look at Alistair either. His essay appeared on time on Monday, perfect and punctual, a monument to the discipline Alistair had demanded. It felt like a condemnation. When Friday came, Alistair didn't know if Leo would show up. He prepared the 2 coffees anyway, his hand trembling slightly as he poured the cream into Leo's mug. 4 o'clock. A knock. Quiet, tentative. "Come in," Alistair said, his voice tighter than usual. Leo entered. He looked tired but composed. He placed his satchel on the chair, but didn't sit down. He held a large portfolio folder. "I finished the project for my advanced art class," he said, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over Alistair's shoulder. "The one I was working on that night. I'd like you to see it. Before the exhibition next week." Alistair nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Leo laid the portfolio on the desk and carefully unzipped it. He pulled out a large, matted drawing, protected by a sheet of glassine paper. He hesitated for a moment, then removed the protective sheet. Alistair's breath caught in his throat. It was the finished piece, titled simply, "The Architect." It was breathtaking. It depicted a man seen from the back, building an intricate lattice of scaffolding. The man's form was suggested rather than detailed, but Alistair knew the set of those shoulders, the tilt of that head, the way the hair curled just at the nape of the neck. It was him, undeniably. The structure he was building was rigid, geometric, perfect in its symmetry, a representation of order, of discipline, of the intellectual framework Alistair lived by. But growing within and through this structure were wild, lush vines and flowers. They weren't constrained by the scaffolding. They used it. They twisted around the beams, bursting forth with vibrant, chaotic life, their blooms reaching for a sun that seemed to shine from within the canvas itself. The discipline didn't cage the wildness. It supported it, elevated it, allowed it to reach heights it never could have on its own. It was a love letter, not one of passion and romance, but of deep, profound understanding. It was Leo seeing him, truly seeing him, and reflecting back not just the stern teacher, but the structure that allowed beauty to flourish. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever created for him. He stared at it, unable to speak, his carefully constructed composure in ruins, his eyes pricked with a heat he refused to acknowledge. "Leo," he finally managed, his voice a raw whisper. "This is... I have no words." "You gave me the words," Leo said softly, his gaze finally meeting Alistair's. The defiance was gone. The hurt from the studio was gone. In its place was something quiet, steady, and terrifyingly mature. "You were right about the framework. I thought you were trying to put me in a box, but you weren't. You were trying to give me a foundation, so I could build something taller." He gestured to the drawing. "This is that. What I built because of you." The air in the room was thick with everything that was being said in the silence. The gratitude, the respect, the profound intellectual connection, and humming beneath it all, the undeniable electric current of something more. Alistair wanted to tell him everything. How Leo's mind fascinated him. How his passion invigorated him. How the sight of him filled the empty, ordered spaces of his life with color and light. How he thought about him constantly, in ways a teacher should never think about a student. He looked from the drawing to Leo's face, and he saw it, all reflected there. Leo knew. He might not have had the words for it either, but he felt it. This was no longer a one-sided infatuation. It was a connection, deep and real and mutual, and it was impossible. The weight of it was crushing. "You did this," Alistair said, forcing himself to focus on the art, on the talent, on the safe ground of mentorship. "How you did all of this? I merely handed you a tool." His voice was thick with emotion he could not disguise. "It is a masterpiece. You should be incredibly proud." He wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, to finally acknowledge the truth that was screaming in the space between them. But he couldn't. He was the teacher. He was the adult. He was the architect. And the first rule of architecture is that the foundation must be sound. What they felt, as real as it was built on unstable ground. To act on it would be to risk bringing the entire beautiful structure down. "The exhibition is on Thursday," Leo said, his voice equally thick. He carefully covered the drawing again, his fingers lingering on the portfolio. "Will you come?" "I wouldn't miss it," Alistair said. And it was the truest thing he'd said all week. The annual Evergreen Academy Winter Exhibition was a grand affair. The Great Hall was transformed. White walls adorned with the best student work, buzzing with parents, trustees, and students sipping punch. Alistair moved through the crowd, his heart a drum in his chest. He'd dressed with extra care. A dark navy suit, a crisp white shirt, a silent tribute. He found it on a central wall, spotlighted. The architect. Seeing it here, in public, with others gathered around it, murmuring in admiration, was a peculiar kind of agony. It was their secret, displayed for all to see, though only they knew its true meaning. He stood before it, losing track of time, seeing the care in every line, the love in every bloom. "It's something, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. He turned. Leo stood there, clean-shaven, wearing a simple black suit that made him look both older and heartbreakingly young. His eyes were bright with nervous energy. "It's the best piece in the show," Alistair said, and he meant it. "Thank you," Leo said. He looked around at the crowded room, then back at Alistair. The noise seemed to fade around them. For everything. This was it. The end of the semester was near. The Friday sessions would end. Leo would move on to other teachers, other classes. This strange, intense, transformative chapter was closing. "You never needed to thank me," Alistair said softly. "It was my privilege." They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by people yet utterly alone. "What happens now?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air, laden with a hope and a fear that mirrored Alistair's. So Alistair looked at him, at this brilliant, beautiful young man he had helped shape, and who had in turn utterly reshaped him. He thought of the future. Of a year from now when Leo would have graduated. Of a world where they would no longer be teacher and student. The possibility shimmered, tantalizing and just out of reach. But it was a possibility built on a maybe. And Alistair's discipline, the very core of him that Leo had so beautifully captured, would not allow him to gamble with Leo's present, on the chance of a future maybe. Leo needed to fly on his own, to build his own structures, without this complicated secret weight. The greatest discipline, he realized, was not in holding on but in letting go, in loving something enough to give it the freedom to become what it was meant to be. He took a small, sharp breath, steeling himself. He met Leo's gaze, allowing every ounce of his pride, his care, and his devastating affection to show in his eyes just for a second. A final, silent confession, then he offered a small, sad, infinitely proud smile. "Now," Alistair said, his voice steady with a hard-won resolve, "you continue to be exceptional. You don't need me anymore, Leo. You have your own tools, you have your own discipline. Use them." He saw the understanding dawn in Leo's eyes, followed by a flash of pain but also a dawning acceptance. Leo nodded slowly, his own smile bittersweet. He understood. It was the right answer. The only answer. "I'll try," Leo whispered. "I know you will," Alistair said. He gave the drawing one last long look. He imprinted it on his memory, the structure, the wildness, the perfect, impossible balance. Then he turned and walked away through the crowd, out of the great hall and into the cold winter night. He didn't look back. The architect had finished his work. The structure was sound, and the wild, beautiful thing within it was finally, gloriously free.